The mysterious signal. It was a calm evening in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, a place few had ever ventured. The stars glimmered in the distance, but deep within the quiet of space, an unusual signal began to pulse through the darkness. No one had expected anything like this. The signal wasn't random. It was too precise, too deliberate. It was a message. Someone, or something, was trying to reach out. The crew of the Starfinder, a small but well-equipped ship, was on a routine mission to chart unknown regions of space. Captain Kale, a seasoned explorer, sat in his command chair, studying the star maps on his screen. He had seen a lot during his years in space: asteroid fields, rogue planets, and strange cosmic storms. But this was different. The signal wasn't from any known civilization. It wasn't like anything they had encountered before. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant Mira called out from her station at the communications console. Kale turned in his chair, his brow furrowing. He walked over to Mira's side, his boots echoing softly in the quiet control room. The signal was faint but growing stronger. Mira had already started decoding it. "It's coming from a system light years away from here," Mira said, her voice tense. "But this isn't just any transmission. It's coded. Someone's trying to tell us something." Kale leaned over, his fingers lightly tracing the holographic display. The signal's pattern was intricate, with sections of it repeating at regular intervals. It was almost like a language, but not one he recognized. His mind raced. A hidden message, or maybe a distress signal. "What are they saying?" Kale asked, his voice low. "I'm still working on it," Mira replied, her fingers moving rapidly across the controls. "But what's strange is that this isn't just a signal. It seems to be instructions, blueprints. Whoever sent this, they want us to find something. Something important." The thought sent a chill down Cal's spine. Blueprints. Who would send blueprints across the galaxy? And for what purpose? It didn't make sense. The distance was far too great for any conventional means of communication. And yet, here it was, clear as day, pulsing across the dark void of space. "We need to follow this," Kale said firmly, his decision made. He turned to Mira. "Prepare the ship. We're going to investigate." The crew was immediately put into action. The Starfinder had been equipped with advanced scanners, capable of detecting even the faintest of signals across vast distances. The crew was excited, though there was a sense of unease in the air. They were heading into the unknown, and there was no telling what they might find. As they set their course for the distant system, the signal continued to grow stronger, as if guiding them toward something. It was an odd sensation, being drawn to something unseen, something that seemed almost alive. Cal couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random signal. It felt deliberate, purposeful. Someone, or something, was waiting for them. Hours passed, and the Starfinder flew deeper into space, leaving behind the familiar stars of their home galaxy. The crew settled into their routines, but there was a strange tension in the air. Everyone could feel it, though no one spoke of it directly. What were they about to discover? "Captain, we're approaching the source of the signal," Mira announced, breaking the silence. "It's coming from a planet in the system." Kale looked at the planet on the screen. It was small, dark, and unremarkable from a distance. Just another cold, lifeless rock orbiting a distant star. But as they got closer, something strange happened. The planet was surrounded by an energy field, one that flickered and pulsed with unnatural light. It wasn't like any energy field Cal had ever seen before. "What is that?" Kale asked, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. "I'm not sure, Captain," Mira replied. "But it's definitely not natural. It's almost as if it's protecting something." Cal's heart raced. Protecting something. What could possibly be on that planet that required such a powerful, mysterious shield? "Should we send a landing party?" Lieutenant Thorne, the ship's security officer, asked. His hand was already resting on the sidearm at his belt, ready for anything. Cale hesitated for a moment. He knew the risks. They had no idea what they might encounter on that planet. But the signal, the message, was too important to ignore. They had to know what was waiting for them. "Yes," Cale said at last. "Prepare a team. We're going down." As the team suited up and prepared to leave the ship, Cale couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much bigger than they could imagine. Whoever had sent the signal was playing a dangerous game, and now they were a part of it. The shuttle descended toward the planet's surface, cutting through the energy field with ease. The mysterious light surrounding the planet shimmered around them, and Cale couldn't help but wonder what kind of civilization, if any, had created such a powerful shield. And why? As they landed, the crew's boots touched the cold, rocky surface of the planet. The air was thin, and the sky above them was an eerie shade of purple, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The silence was deafening. Not a sound could be heard except for the hum of their equipment. "We're here," Cale said, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. He motioned for the crew to follow him as they moved toward the source of the signal. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of something much larger. Whatever secrets the planet held, they were about to uncover them. And with that, the mysterious signal led them deeper into the unknown, toward a discovery that would change everything. A dangerous journey. The Starfinder drifted through space, the distant stars twinkling like tiny diamonds, while the crew prepared for their dangerous journey to the mysterious planet. Tension was thick in the air. No one spoke much, but every member of the crew knew the stakes. This was no ordinary mission. The strange signal, the energy field around the planet, and the cryptic blueprints they had intercepted, all of it led to something greater, something unknown. Captain Cale stood at the helm, watching the planet slowly grow larger on the screen. The swirling energy field around it shimmered like a mirage, its colors constantly shifting. There was something mesmerizing about it, but also deeply unsettling. No one could explain it, not even the ship's advanced scanners. It was as if the planet itself was hiding something. "Captain," Mira's voice broke the silence. "I've never seen anything like this. The energy field it's unlike any known power source. It's almost as if the planet itself is alive." Cale turned to face her, his expression hard. He knew she was right. This wasn't just some unknown planet they were about to explore. Whatever lay ahead was far beyond their comprehension. But it wasn't just the energy field that worried him. It was the signal they had received. Deliberate, precise, and leading them here. "Are we sure this is the right decision?" Lieutenant Thorne, the ship's security officer, asked. His voice was steady, but Cale could hear the concern in his tone. "This could be a trap. Whoever sent that signal might not want us here." Cale stared at the screen, his hand resting on the console. The decision had already been made. "We're already too far in. We have to see this through." With a deep breath, Cale turned to his crew. "Prepare for entry. All systems, check. We can't afford any mistakes." The crew worked in unison, each person focused on their task. As they neared the planet, the atmosphere of uncertainty thickened. It was as if the very air was charged with danger. The ship's engines hummed, a constant reminder that they were on the edge of something extraordinary. They were heading into uncharted territory, where nothing was certain, and everything was a risk. The energy field flickered again, brighter this time, as if acknowledging their arrival. Cale couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them, studying them, like an ancient guardian waiting for intruders. As the ship began to enter the field's boundary, the controls started to vibrate slightly. The sensors buzzed, picking up erratic readings. "Captain, I'm losing control of some systems," Mira said urgently. "We're being pulled toward the surface. The field is affecting our navigation." Cale gripped the armrests of his chair, his jaw tight. They were too close to turn back now. "Hold steady. We'll make it through." With the ship shaking slightly, the crew braced for impact. The Starfinder descended slowly, its engines fighting the pull of the mysterious field. Through the viewport, the barren planet below seemed to beckon them forward. The rocky surface appeared desolate and cold, but there was something strange about it. The land below was covered in large, perfectly shaped structures, as though a city once stood there, a city made of star metal. "What in the galaxy?" Lieutenant Thorne muttered under his breath. "Those aren't natural formations." Cal's gaze hardened. He knew that whatever was here was no ordinary planet. It had been shaped by intelligence, by a hand that knew what it was doing. But who? And why? The shuttle rocked violently as the energy field around the planet seemed to intensify. The ship groaned under the pressure, but Cal refused to panic. They were so close now. They couldn't stop. They had to land, no matter what. "Prepare for emergency landing," Cal ordered. The shuttle's descent was almost too fast to control, but Mira's quick thinking helped them stabilize their course. With a loud thud, the shuttle finally touched down on the surface, kicking up dust and debris as it came to a halt. Cal quickly stood up from his chair. His heart was pounding, and his mind raced with thoughts of what might await them. He glanced at the rest of the crew, each of them looking at him for guidance. "Stay sharp," Cal said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We don't know what we're walking into. Let's move out." The crew filed out of the shuttle, stepping onto the cold, rocky ground of the planet. The air was thin and crisp, but there was an almost unnatural stillness. The silence was deafening. No sounds of wind, no birds, no creatures. Nothing. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Cal took a deep breath, his boots crunching on the surface as he moved forward. They had landed in a valley of sorts, surrounded by towering structures made from the same star metal they had seen in the blueprints. These were no ordinary ruins. These were ancient, yet they seemed almost alive. The metal shimmered in the pale light, reflecting an eerie glow. "What are these?" Mira asked, her voice filled with awe. "Old cities," Cal replied. "Very old. Whoever built them had technology far beyond what we know." The team spread out, scanning the area. There was no sign of life, no movement in the shadows. Yet Cal couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every step they took seemed to echo louder than it should have. It felt as if the very ground was waiting for them to make the next move. As they moved deeper into the city ruins, the energy field surrounding the planet seemed to pulse with greater intensity. It was as though it was reacting to their presence, growing stronger with each passing second. The crew's instruments flickered as they scanned the buildings, unable to make sense of the data. "Captain," Thorne said, his voice tense, "there's something off about this place. It feels wrong." Cal nodded. He felt it too. There was a strange energy here, a force that made his skin crawl. And then, just as he was about to speak, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The buildings around them began to shift. The first encounter. The crew of the Starfinder had only just begun to explore the ancient city when the ground beneath them began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, like the deep rumblings of a far-off storm, but it quickly grew stronger. The walls of the star metal structures around them began to shift, creaking and groaning as if waking from a long-forgotten slumber. The energy field that had surrounded the planet flickered, sparking erratically like a dying flame. "Captain," Mira said, her voice strained, "something's happening. I'm picking up unusual readings from the energy field. It's like it's responding to us." Cal frowned, his instincts on high alert. "Stay focused," he ordered. "We need to keep moving. There's no turning back now." As they ventured deeper into the city, the air grew colder. The towering structures of star metal loomed above them, casting long shadows across the cracked ground. Despite the eerie silence, there was a palpable sense that something was watching them. Something ancient, powerful, and aware. Then, without warning, the silence was shattered. From the shadows ahead, a low hum filled the air, deep, vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. It was as if the planet itself was alive, breathing, reacting to their presence. Did anyone else hear that? Lieutenant Thorne asked, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Before Cal could respond, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but its skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow, as if made of the same star metal that surrounded them. Its eyes, bright and piercing, locked onto Cal's, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. The figure was not like any being Cal had ever seen before. It seemed to emanate power, ancient and overwhelming. "Who are you?" Cal demanded, his voice steady but laced with caution. He had no idea what this being was, but he knew one thing for sure. It was not a friendly face. The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it stood there, observing them, its glowing eyes scanning the crew one by one. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, the weight of the encounter pressing down on Cal's chest. It was as if the figure was judging them, deciding whether they were worthy of whatever secrets this planet held. Finally, the being spoke, its voice a deep, resonating hum that seemed to echo in Cal's mind, rather than through his ears. "You are not welcome here," it said, the words chilling in their simplicity. "This world is not for the likes of you." Cal stood tall, unwilling to show fear in front of his crew. "We came because of the signal," he said firmly. "We need to understand why you sent it." The figure's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Cal could feel the weight of its gaze, almost as if it was reading his thoughts. The signal was a warning. The figure said, its voice cold and distant. "A warning you chose to ignore." Mira took a step forward, her voice shaky but determined. "A warning? What do you mean? Why send a signal if you didn't want anyone to come?" The figure seemed to pause, its eyes flickering for a moment. Then it spoke again, this time with more urgency in its tone. "The cities you seek to awaken are not meant for your kind. They were built by the ancients, beings far beyond your understanding. The star metal cities were not intended to be used as tools of power. They are weapons, destructive, uncontrollable weapons." Cal's heart sank as the weight of the being's words settled over him. They had come here seeking answers, but now they were learning the true nature of the star metal cities. These weren't just advanced structures, they were dangerous, and their power could bring ruin to entire galaxies. "Why are you here?" Cal asked, his voice harder now, demanding answers. "Who are you to guard this place?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it stepped closer, its form becoming more distinct in the low light. As it did, Cal could see that it wasn't just a simple being. It was a guardian, a protector of the city, and perhaps the key to unlocking the deeper mysteries of the planet. "I am one of the last of the ancients," the figure finally said, its voice filled with sorrow. "We were once the rulers of this galaxy, masters of the star metal cities. But we fell. Our greed and arrogance led to our downfall. The cities we built to protect us became our prison, and we were forced to abandon them." Cal could hardly believe what he was hearing. The figure before him was the last of an ancient race, one that had once controlled unimaginable power. And now, it was warning them about the very cities they had come to find. "Why warn us?" Mira asked, her voice trembling. "If the cities are so dangerous, why not just destroy them?" The figure's eyes flashed with a flicker of anger. "We cannot destroy them," it replied, the hum of its voice growing louder, almost as if it was struggling with its own limitations. "We tried, but the power of the cities is beyond us. It is tied to the very fabric of the galaxy itself. We sealed them away, hoping that no one would ever find them. But you?" It paused, its eyes narrowing. "You were chosen. The signal was meant for you." Cal took a step back, trying to process the enormity of what he was being told. Chosen? By who? By what? The figure raised its hand, and for a brief moment, the sky above them seemed to shift, revealing a map of stars and constellations. The stars themselves seemed to glow brighter, as if responding to the being's call. "You have come here not by accident," the figure said, its voice now filled with both wisdom and warning. "The signal you received was not a plea for help. It was a test to see if you were worthy to wield the power of the cities. But the power you seek will consume you. It will destroy everything you hold dear." The ground trembled again, this time more violently. The figure's eyes flickered with urgency. "You must leave now," it commanded. "If you do not, you will be too late. The power of the cities is awakening." The crew stood frozen, torn between the desire to understand and the overwhelming fear of what might happen next. The figure, the last of the ancients, was not just a warning. It was a final chance to turn back. But Kale knew they couldn't turn back. Not now. They had come too far, and the truth was within their grasp. "We can't leave," Kale said, his voice resolute. "We have to stop whatever is coming." The figure's glowing eyes softened, a look of sadness crossing its features. "Then you are already too late," it whispered. And with that, the first encounter came to an end. The crew was left standing in the ruins of an ancient city, unsure of what to do next, but knowing that the real danger was only just beginning. The hidden truth. The crew of the Starfinder stood motionless, their minds racing after the cryptic warnings of the ancient being. The figure had vanished, leaving them standing in the desolate, eerie remains of the Star Metal City. The truth about the Star Metal Cities had begun to sink in. These weren't just powerful relics, they were weapons capable of immense destruction. But that was only part of the story. The figure had mentioned something about the power of the cities awakening, and Cal couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking directly into the heart of a looming storm. "Captain," Mira said, breaking the heavy silence, "we need to figure out what the ancients were trying to say. There's more to this than just power. The cities, they were built for something, and whatever that something is, it's tied to this planet. I can feel it." Kale nodded, his gaze scanning the darkened skyline of the ruined city. The towering star metal structures still stood like silent sentinels, but now they felt more like prison walls, enclosing them in a place they didn't fully understand. His mind raced with questions, but only one stood out. What had really happened to the ancients? "Let's keep moving," Kale said, his voice tight with resolve. "We need to uncover what's hidden here. We can't afford to miss anything." The crew proceeded cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. As they moved deeper into the city, the air around them grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the weight of centuries of secrets was pressing down on them. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the soft hum of their equipment. They came upon what appeared to be a central plaza, a vast open space surrounded by towering structures of star metal. In the middle of the plaza stood a massive monument, its surface covered in intricate symbols and markings that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. At first glance, it looked like an altar, but Kel couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more, a key to understanding the fate of the ancients and the purpose of the star metal cities. "Captain, look at this," Thorne said, kneeling beside the monument and running his hand over the symbols. "These markings, they look like some kind of language, but it's nothing I've ever seen before." Cale stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the symbols. They weren't just random carvings. The patterns seemed to pulse with energy, reacting to their presence. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Mira," Cale called, "can you analyze these symbols? I think this might be the key to understanding what happened here." Mira moved to the monument, her fingers moving swiftly over her console as she began to analyze the patterns. "I'm scanning them now, Captain," she said. This is strange. It's like the symbols are alive, shifting, responding to my touch." For a few moments, the crew waited in tense silence, the only sound the soft whir of Mira's console. Then, her voice cut through the stillness. "Captain, I think I've got something. These symbols, they're not just a language. Their instructions, blueprints. They're detailing the creation of the star metal cities. And something else. A machine. A device. But I don't understand what it's for. Cal's heart skipped a beat. Blueprints. For what? The realization hit him like a freight train. The cities were not only weapons, they were part of something far larger. The ancients had built these cities for a purpose tied to the galaxy itself. What is the device supposed to do? Cal asked urgently, stepping closer. Mira hesitated, her brow furrowing as she studied the screen. I think it's a power source, a central core that controls the cities. It's capable of tapping into the very fabric of space itself, drawing power from stars and black holes. But there's more. This device is connected to the planet itself. It's like the planet is the anchor, and the cities are the vessels. Cal's mind raced. The cities weren't just weapons, they were part of a larger, more dangerous plan. The device was a core that could manipulate energy on an unimaginable scale, tapping into the most powerful forces in the universe. But what had the ancients intended to do with it? And why had they hidden it away? As Mira continued to analyze the blueprint, a thought gnawed at the back of Cal's mind. The figure, the last of the ancients, had warned them about the city's awakening. But had the figure been a warning, or had it been trying to protect them? From what? We need to find this device, Cal said finally, his voice filled with determination. We need to know what it does before it falls into the wrong hands. The crew moved out again, with a sense of urgency now that they understood the true nature of their mission. They had to locate the device and understand its purpose, but something deep inside Cal told him that uncovering this truth could change everything. The weight of the decision hung heavy on his shoulders. They were stepping into the heart of a power that could reshape the galaxy, and yet they still didn't know if it would be a blessing or a curse. The further they went into the ruins, the more they found. Hidden chambers beneath the surface, sealed doors that resisted their every attempt to open them, and strange alien machinery that hummed with energy. Each discovery only added to the mystery, each step closer to the truth. Yet it also felt like they were walking on the edge of a knife, teetering between salvation and destruction. Then, as they approached a massive building deep within the heart of the city, Cal felt it, the unmistakable hum of power. It came from within the structure, the energy flowing through the very walls, making the air buzz with anticipation. It was the device. He could feel it. "We're close," Cal said, his voice barely a whisper. They entered the building, and there it was. In the center of the room stood a massive structure, its shape both elegant and terrifying. It was a machine, but it was more than that. It was alive, pulsing with energy. The core of the device was suspended in the air, surrounded by intricate, glowing patterns that mirrored the symbols on the monument outside. Mira stepped forward, her eyes wide with awe. This is it. This is the heart of the city. The power. It's unimaginable. Cal took a cautious step toward the device, his mind spinning with possibilities. What had the ancients built this for, and how had they controlled it? As he reached out to touch the core, a sudden realization struck him. The ancients had created this device to harness the power of the galaxy, maybe even to control it. But somewhere along the way, they had lost control. The device, this core, had become the source of their downfall. "This is not just a power source," Cal said quietly. "It's a weapon capable of destroying everything." And just as the words left his mouth, the ground shook once again, and the device began to hum louder. The power was awakening. The betrayal. The atmosphere in the Star Metal City was growing increasingly tense. The discovery of the ancient power source had shifted their mission from mere exploration to something far more urgent and dangerous. The crew of the Starfinder had stumbled upon a weapon of unimaginable power, a device capable of altering the very fabric of the galaxy. And yet, as they stood on the precipice of this discovery, something felt off. The air seemed to hum with a hidden energy, one that made the hairs on the back of Cal's neck stand on end. It was as though the city itself was reacting to their presence, waking up after centuries of dormancy. But they didn't have time to dwell on the growing unease. They had to make a decision. Should they attempt to control this power, or should they destroy it to prevent its catastrophic potential from ever being unleashed? As the crew gathered in a temporary command center deep within the city's heart, Cal couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Even though the ruins were barren and silent, the sense that something, or someone, was watching them grew stronger with each passing hour. "Captain, I've managed to isolate the source of the energy surge," Mira said, her fingers dancing across the console. "The device is linked to the entire planet. If we activate it, the power will spread across the galaxy. It's not just a weapon, it's a conduit. It can tap into every star and every black hole, draining them for energy, turning entire systems into nothing but husks." Cal's stomach tightened. He had feared this. The potential for destruction was beyond anything they could imagine. But what if they could use the device to fuel peace, to restore the balance that the galaxy had lost after years of war? The temptation was strong, but Cal knew better than to give in to it. "We can't take the chance," Cal said firmly. "We need to destroy it. If we don't, the consequences will be catastrophic." The rest of the crew nodded in agreement, but there was a shadow of doubt in Thorne's eyes. He had been quiet for some time, his face hard to read. Something about his silence unnerved Cal. "Thorne, what's on your mind?" Cal asked, turning to the security officer. Thorne hesitated for a moment, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sidearm. "Captain, I agree with the plan to destroy the device," Thorne said slowly, his voice laced with uncertainty. "But there's something you need to know. I've been getting messages from someone I shouldn't be talking to." Cal's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, Thorne? Who have you been talking to?" Thorne looked around the room, making sure no one else was listening. His eyes were filled with conflict. "I've been in contact with the Galactic Council, with a faction that's been monitoring us. They knew we were on this mission. They knew about the device, and they've been watching us from the moment we landed." Mira's face went pale. "What? You've been in contact with them? Without telling us?" Thorne nodded, his jaw set. "I didn't have a choice. They promised me resources, power, everything we'd need to rebuild after the wars. I thought I could help. But now, I see things differently. They want the device for themselves. They want to control it. If we destroy it, we destroy everything they've been working for." Cal's world tilted. Thorne's betrayal hit him harder than any enemy fire ever could. He had trusted Thorne. The security officer was supposed to be the backbone of their team, someone who could be relied on in the most dangerous situations. But now, Cal realized, Thorne had been playing both sides all along. His loyalties had never been with the crew, only with his own ambitions. "You're saying you've been working with them behind our backs?" Cal's voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief. Thorne didn't flinch. "I never meant for things to go this far, but the Galactic Council can offer us a future. If we control this power, we could finally bring peace to the galaxy. No more fighting, no more suffering." Cal took a step forward, his fists clenched. "That's not how peace works, Thorne. You can't control the universe with power. You'll just be repeating the same mistakes the ancients made." The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the sound of Mira's rapid breathing as she processed the news. Thorne's revelation hit everyone like a shockwave. They had trusted him, relied on him, and now it felt like that trust had been shattered. "Captain, he's right," Thorne continued, his voice steady now, as if he had accepted the weight of his choices. "The device doesn't just control energy. It can change the course of history. It can end wars, end the chaos. If we use it correctly, we can shape the galaxy into something better." Cal felt his blood boil. He had heard enough. The idea of using the device to control the galaxy was a dangerous fantasy, one that would only lead to more suffering. The ancients had created the device to protect themselves, but it had destroyed them instead. Now Thorn wanted to repeat that mistake. "You've made your choice, Thorn," Cale said, his voice cold. "But you've crossed a line. You're no longer part of this crew." Thorn's eyes darkened, but he didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I knew you'd say that. I didn't expect you to understand." Before Cale could respond, Thorn turned and walked toward the exit. "I'm not going to fight you, Captain, but I won't let you destroy the device either. If you want to stop me, you'll have to kill me." With those final words, Thorn left the room, his footsteps echoing through the cold, dark halls of the star-metal city. The crew stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. The betrayal had cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. Thorn had chosen his path, and Cale had no intention of letting him or anyone else control the device. "We can't let him get to it first," Cale said, his voice grim. "We have to stop Thorn before he activates the device. We're running out of time." But even as Cale spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer in control of the situation. The stakes had just risen higher than they could have ever imagined. The final battle. The Starfinder crew had barely recovered from Thorn's betrayal when the stakes became impossibly higher. The moment Cale had feared was upon them. Thorn had taken the first step toward seizing control of the star-metal city's power, and if they didn't act fast, he would unlock the device's full potential. The energy hum that had reverberated through the city was now a constant, the very air around them thick with the pressure of imminent destruction. The time for words was over. Now, it was a race against time to stop Thorn, and whatever consequences lay ahead, they had no choice but to face them head-on. Cale stood at the head of the command room in the heart of the city. The console in front of him displayed the device's rapidly escalating energy levels. "He's getting closer," Cale muttered, his voice low, focused. The connection between the city and the power core was growing stronger, sending pulses of light across the dark ruins. The device, this horrifying tool, was waking up, its dormant power now just within Thorn's grasp. "Captain," Mira said, her voice trembling with urgency, "he's using the device's energy grid to move faster than we can track him. The cities themselves are working for him now, channeling power straight to his location. We have to catch him before he activates it." "I know," Cale said, his jaw tightening. "We can't afford to lose him. If Thorn activates the core, everything will change, and not for the better." The crew, their faces set in grim determination, knew what had to be done. There was no more room for mistakes. Thorn had already demonstrated his willingness to go to any lengths for control. The stars, the galaxies, everything was at risk if he succeeded. "Move out," Cale commanded, his voice a sharp order. "We're going to stop him before he reaches the core." The crew quickly gathered their weapons and equipment, preparing for the final leg of their journey. Every step they took felt like it could be their last. The eerie energy pulsed around them, and as they advanced deeper into the heart of the city, it felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. The power from the device was infiltrating the city like a living thing, every step they took resonating with its increasing power. "Stay alert," Thorn's voice came through the comms, cold and sharp. "I know you're coming for me. You won't stop this." Cale's heart raced at the sound of his voice. Thorn had set his course, and now he was playing a dangerous game, baiting the crew, taunting them with the certainty of his success. It only fueled Cale's resolve to end this madness once and for all. As they neared the central chamber where the device was located, the landscape of the city began to change around them. The buildings, which had once appeared lifeless, now seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. The very structure of the city seemed to shift, as though the ancient city itself was responding to Thorn's commands. It was like walking through a labyrinth, each corridor and room now an obstacle, each step bringing them closer to the inevitable clash. When they reached the final set of doors leading into the chamber where the core was housed, the walls exploded with light, revealing a massive chamber towering above them. The energy in the air crackled, and at the center of the room stood Thorn, his figure bathed in the unnatural glow of the device. He was standing in front of the core, his hands raised in defiance, channeling the raw power that flowed from it. "You're too late," Thorn shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This is it. The power is mine to wield. No more wars. No more chaos. The galaxy will finally be united under my control." Cal's heart pounded as he stepped into the chamber, his eyes locked on Thorn. The betrayal still burned in him, but there was no room for hesitation. They were out of time. "Thorn, listen to me," Cal shouted, his voice filled with both anger and desperation. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This power isn't meant to be controlled. It will consume you, just like it consumed the ancients. This is not the way to bring peace." Thorn turned, his face a mask of cold resolve. "Peace? This isn't about peace. It's about control. The galaxy is broken, and only I have the strength to fix it." Before Cal could respond, Thorn raised his hand, and the core flashed with an overwhelming surge of energy. The walls of the chamber trembled, the very foundations of the city shaking, as if protesting the power that was about to be unleashed. Mira, Thorn's former ally, stepped forward, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Cal, we have no choice. We have to stop him now. If we don't, he'll trigger the core's full potential, and the energy will tear through the galaxy. Everything we fought for, everything we've tried to build, will be gone in an instant." Cal nodded grimly. "We stop him here, or we lose everything." Without another word, the crew launched into action. Thorn was standing in front of the core, his hands now engulfed in crackling energy as he attempted to fully activate the device. His eyes were wild with ambition, and Cal could see the madness taking hold. The star metal city around them had become his weapon, feeding him the energy he needed to carry out his plan. "Stop him," Cal barked. In an instant, the room erupted in a storm of chaos. Mira and Thorn exchanged fire as Cal and the others sprinted toward the core. The energy in the room grew unbearable, its intensity burning through their suits, making every movement feel like it was slowing them down. Thorn's figure flickered with the power of the core, and it seemed as though he had become one with it, his eyes glowing with the same unnatural light. "You can't stop me, Cal," Thorn roared, his voice a mix of anger and triumph. The walls around them buckled, sending debris scattering across the floor. The city itself was responding to Thorn's control, and with every second that passed, the energy increased exponentially. It was a race against time. Cal could feel it in his chest. They couldn't afford to fail. Mira's voice cut through the noise. "Cal, we need to overload the core's power. It's the only way to shut it down." Cal nodded, his mind racing for a solution. They had to get to the central control mechanism and cut off Thorn's power before it was too late. As they neared the control panel, Thorn lunged toward them, his hand crackling with energy. With one swift motion, he launched a burst of raw power that sent Cal flying back, crashing into the wall. His vision blurred, and for a moment, everything seemed to go dark. But Cal wasn't done yet. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself up, stumbling toward the control panel. Mira was there beside him, already working on the device. "We can do this," Mira said, her voice tense as she hacked into the core's system. Just a few more seconds. Thorn's figure loomed over them, his form glowing with terrifying energy. "You're too weak to stop me," he shouted, his voice filled with derision. With a final push, Mira hit the button. The room exploded with light as the core began to overload, the energy surging through the chamber like a tidal wave. Thorn's screams filled the room, but they were drowned out by the deafening roar of the device as it collapsed in on itself, its energy dissipating into the void. Cal watched as Thorn crumpled to the floor, the power fading from his eyes. The battle was over. The new dawn. The chamber was silent now, the violent rumblings of the battle fading into an eerie calm. The core that had once pulsed with an unimaginable power was now dormant, its once violent energy reduced to nothing more than faint whispers in the air. The walls around them, the star-metal city itself, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, as if acknowledging the end of the storm that had threatened to tear the galaxy apart. Cal's body was bruised, his muscles sore from the intense fight. But the victory was undeniable. Thorn, once so consumed by his ambition, now lay motionless at the center of the chamber, his eyes closed and his chest still. The madness that had driven him was finally extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, silent remnants of his actions. For a moment, Cal stood there, breathing heavily, unable to believe that it was finally over. But as he looked around, something stirred inside him, something deeper than the relief of having won. The weight of the responsibility they had just carried was far from over. The star-metal cities, the ancient power, the device that could reshape the universe, all of it was now in their hands. What would they do with it? What would become of the galaxy after this? "We did it," Mira said softly, her voice breaking through the silence. She stood beside Cal, her face marked with exhaustion, but there was a sense of triumph in her eyes. "The galaxy, it's safe. At least for now." Cal nodded, though his mind was clouded with doubt. He couldn't help but wonder how long the peace would last. Could the galaxy truly be saved from itself? Could anyone ever be trusted with this kind of power again? "We've only just begun," Cal muttered to himself, his voice quiet but determined. The crew gathered around him, the weight of their shared experiences pulling them together like a thread binding them to this moment. They had come here as explorers, but now they were more than that. They were the keepers of a power that could either save or destroy everything they had fought for. "We need to make sure this power doesn't fall into the wrong hands again," Cal said, his voice gaining strength. "We can't leave this device here. We need to secure it, protect it from anyone who might want to use it." Mira stepped forward, her face etched with determination. "We need to destroy it. This kind of power, it can't exist in the hands of anyone. If we let it live, we risk everything." The decision was heavy, but Cal knew she was right. The device, the core, it was far too dangerous to be left alone. It was a weapon, a power beyond comprehension, and even the noblest intentions couldn't control it forever. "Agreed," Cal said. "Let's end this, once and for all." The crew worked together to dismantle the core, each movement slow and deliberate, as if they were undoing centuries of destruction and manipulation. Mira handled the delicate technology, carefully disengaging the power circuits, while the others kept watch for any signs of trouble. They knew that activating the core again, even by mistake, could spell disaster. As they dismantled the last pieces, the city around them seemed to change. The once glowing star-metal structures that had hummed with power began to fade, their energy dissipating, leaving behind cold, lifeless ruins. The cities, which had once been the crown jewel of the ancients, were now just empty shells, relics of a time long past. And then, as the core's final circuits were disabled, the hum of the energy faded entirely. The silence that followed was profound. The world, the galaxy, had changed. The dangerous power that had threatened to bring it all to ruin was now gone. But in its place, something new was beginning to take shape. Cal stepped back from the device, his breath steadying as he took in the sight before him. The ruins, once teeming with potential destruction, now felt more like a tomb, an end to the reign of the ancients, and perhaps a new beginning for those who had survived. "We've done it." Thorn's voice echoed faintly in Cal's mind, but he refused to give it any more power. Thorn's ambition had been his downfall, and now Cal would not let his legacy define them. The Starfinder crew gathered one last time in the heart of the ancient city, the device now nothing more than scrap, and the weight of their actions heavy in the air. They had saved the galaxy, but they had also destroyed something that could have been used to rebuild it. The question was, had they done the right thing? "Where do we go from here?" Mira asked, breaking the silence. "What happens now?" Kale paused, looking out over the ruins, his mind working through the possibilities. The destruction of the core meant that the star metal cities were no longer a threat, but it also meant that the galaxy was still in turmoil. Wars, conflicts, and unrest still plagued the stars. The Starfinder crew could never go back to their previous lives. They were more than just explorers now. They were the stewards of a new world. "We rebuild," Kale said, his voice filled with conviction. "We protect the future. We find a way to use what we've learned, to ensure that no one, ever tries to control that power again." The crew nodded, their faces set with the same determination that had brought them here in the first place. They had been through the fire, faced betrayal, destruction, and uncertainty, but now they were united in their resolve. The future was uncertain, but they would fight for it. Together. As they boarded the Starfinder, the ship's engines hummed to life, and the crew looked toward the vast expanse of space that lay before them. The galaxy was still broken, still divided, but there was hope. There was always hope, and in the heart of the ruins, where the ancients' great power had once thrived, a new dawn was rising, a dawn shaped by the choices they had made. The stars were no longer distant and cold. They were full of possibilities. And so, the crew of the Starfinder set course for a future they would shape together, knowing that they had been the ones to rewrite history. They had turned the tide. They had chosen a new path. The galaxy might have been on the edge of destruction, but they had chosen to save it.